So welcome everyone. We'll start in a couple minutes. We'll just wait for the last couple of registrants to come in. We should start in about 3 minutes.
Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. It's a webinar for everybody, an instructive webinar, the first of many, we hope, where Edwin and I will be discussing regulatory and licensing outlooks for 2025 and current trends in the gaming industry, particularly the iGaming industry. Just to introduce myself, I'm John Jamarella, an attorney here at Lazarus Legal, part of our gaming division, obviously. My associate and good friend and colleague, Edwin Monzon, is here, the managing partner of our firm. So Edwin, perhaps you can give a bit of background on who we are, actually.
Yeah, so the law firm itself, Lazarus, or the brand Lazarus itself, started from a very well-known lawyer from an international perspective. He's one of the, I would say that he's one of the pioneers within the gaming industry. He used to be the former president of the International Masters of Gaming Law, also the president of the American Bar Association for the gaming division. He helped fund or found a lot of regulatory jurisdictions. He was one of the early guys in the gaming industry back into the 1990s. I myself joined the firm, or joined him in 2004 as a articling student. And since then, I've been working within the gaming industry itself. We help a lot of industry participants, not only regulators. We help a lot of operators, a lot of game developers, a lot of game aggregators, affiliates. We've done a lot of deals, a lot of M&A activity. We're very in tune with the industry. I would say that we have a very good understanding and very good solid experience. We've done, a lot of cross-border transactions with regards to many industry participants, including, for example, companies that are involved in the ID verification space. And so we're very, very proactive within that space. It's something that we've done rather successfully. It's something that we've accomplished now for well over 20 years, I would say, in terms of accompanying some of our clients And our client base goes not only from small startups, but we also have grown with them to the point in which they become public companies, that they've done public offerings. Many years ago, they did ICOs as well, initial coin offerings where that was still permissible. And we've done some SPACs, some special purpose acquisition corporations who actually assumed some of our clients. And some of our clients have maintained or stayed as private enterprises, private businesses, and we still continue to help them in their growth.
Yeah, I mean, Edwin, it's obvious that despite us being a Canadian law firm, we have an international presence because, I mean, iGaming in particular has no borders. I mean, technically it transcends international borders. And because of that, it's become a highly competitive regulatory environment that requires the intervention of legal advisors and other industry professionals, right?
Well, that's correct. That's why technology does cross and transcends all different types of borders. Opening up a different market sometimes is as easy. From a technology perspective, being able to offer and distribute your product across multiple different jurisdictions is relatively cheap. And it had been easy in the past. It's become extremely difficult to do so now because from a regulatory perspective, you need to meet the regulations of each and every single jurisdiction that you're operating within. So in the past, we'll get into this perhaps a little bit later on, but in the past, you used to just get a multi-jurisdictional license and operate across the world. Those days, are numbered at this point in time. Almost every single country has entertained some form of licensing regime whereby they can actually control gaming from within their territory. Are they going to be doing that? Are they successful in doing so? Potentially, maybe. But it is going to come with certain trade-offs directly on their end as well. And, it's very, very difficult to be able to just weed out all of the gray market operators whenever a jurisdiction decides that they want to license this. But, the world right now is going, and the way that we're heading is to a regulatory environment, regulatory world where compliance becomes extremely important.
Absolutely, and the fact that here, us being in Canada, we had a perfect example of that a couple of years back with Ontario being the biggest Canadian province, if you will, regulating a jurisdiction-specific license and basically having a very successful display of it for the Ontario provincial government coffers. The revenue that's being generated through the operators regulating themselves in Ontario has become very, very fruitful. And obviously, other countries, provinces, regions all over the world are saying to themselves, they can stimulate local and national economies by regulating gaming, because obviously the operators are operating anyway. So instead of cracking down, they said, why don't we open the market, regulate it, and have these operators instead of operating in a gray market, actually operate in a licensed regulatory market, and those trends are continuing.
Well, yeah, that's correct. So just to give you an example, there's a lot of talk right now about Alberta, and Alberta being the next province in Canada that's actually going to license this. We've been hearing this for a long period of time, right? This is not something that's new. I think what changes is what model they're going to pursue, whether or not they're going to pursue a model in which they just align themselves directly to Ontario and letting Ontario issue the licenses, and then they recognize those licenses, and so that they can collect the taxes. Or are they going to go more with a Quebec-based model in which they've actually given one of the crown corporations the ability to be able to regulate all forms of gaming within their territory? To a certain extent, it's been successful, but to a certain extent, it has not been successful in Quebec. The numbers that have been thrown out there in terms of how much market they've been able to capture in Quebec varies quite dramatically depending on who you speak to. You have some people who opine that only 30% of the market is being captured by the Crown Corporation here in Quebec, whereas a lot of Quebec, which is the Crown Corporation here, estimates that it's well over 80% of the market that it actually captures. The truth is somewhere in between. The truth is going to be somewhere in between the two. But the reality behind it is that there is a lot of money that these jurisdictions are bypassing by not having or not doing it properly.
But things are changing, right? I mean, the reason for whether it's local governments or national governments entering into this environment is gaming environment itself, or online gaming has become more and more acceptable, right? So you have those social issues where where countries would not want to enter into that fray. It's becoming more acceptable. Obviously, in a highly regulated environment, there's protection and compliance issues that have to be adhered to, which helps the acceptance of such inroads in the gaming world. One interesting market.
But so societal norms, usually a lot of it is guided directly by how much can be put directly into the government coffers, right? And so therefore what you have is you have all of these countries which are looking at what are the opportunities directly for them, right? And yes, we're going to get directly into it. Latin America happens to be one of the markets in which we're very active directly from a law firm perspective. One of the reasons because I am, my first language is Spanish. So we interact very, very well with any of the regulators within the Latin American market. But it's something that we've held very, very tight to our chest in terms of how we counsel our clients in terms of entry, right? So we're going to speak about, the most obvious example right now, and the one that everybody's talking about, and the one that's going through a licensing process right now, except that there seems to be a divergent opinion as to how to enter the market. Some clients or some operators are looking at it and saying, listen, do we continue from a gray market perspective, or do we enter that jurisdiction properly, appropriately by soliciting those licenses? And what are those requirements directly for getting a license? And what benefits do they have in terms of actually obtaining the license? And, that market, I presume, John, that you want to talk about is Brazil.
Yeah, well, Brazil is the obvious, we're talking about Latin America, obviously, as of January of this year. We're talking about trends of 2025. You can't overlook Brazil, that's for sure. So Brazil is the largest South American country. That being said, from a cultural perspective, even though every Latin American country has their own, different culture, the Brazilian culture is quite different. I mean, it's actually, you mentioned being Spanish speaking, it's the only country where, Spanish is not prevalent. It's Portuguese. And, you had mentioned also that the wheels of legislation move slowly. And in this case, it's no different. Brazil started speaking about, entering a regulated environment back in 2017. So it took about 8 years for it to happen. And now, they finally come out with their, establishing themselves as a regulated market. Brazil, what you need to know first is it's targeted, I would say, operators or actors in the business with deep pockets. To get a license, and even though it's a 5-year license, it requires 30 million in local currency, which amounts to about 5.2 million US, which is a hefty sum. I mean, we need to licensing all over the world, and that's a pretty hefty sum, right? It requires deep pockets. Additionally, you'll have a bond that you'll have to place with the Brazilian government, 5 million local currency, so give or take another million USD. So you got to enter into that market with about 6 million US, and we haven't even counted the accounting, the marketing costs, anything of that nature, legal costs, obviously. So you're going into a market with a big bill to pay. But that being said, you have population, the biggest population in South America, over 200 million people. But again, very similar to other regulatory regimes. It requires a Brazilian corporation, for instance. It requires management, employees. It requires a head office in Brazil. Again, most jurisdictions do this to stimulate, local economy, right?
But arguably, Brazil is the largest gaming market in Latin America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So,
And if you have such a high concentration of clients within one jurisdiction, you have to make well, there's going to be certain assumptions that you're going to make, but you're going to have to determine whether or not entering that market, paying that $6 million before you even start it, before you even start the marketing, before you start your implementing your systems directly with the country. You have to make the assumption that you're going to be able to make some money.
yeah, absolutely. So you're most probably going to have the larger players moving first on this, right? And don't forget, obviously, there's even the taxation element. In Brazil, it's 15% of the net revenues. So, again, that has to come into play. Taxation on the
But my understanding, John, is also that one of the ways that they're actually subsidizing this is by splitting the URLs.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So some of the smaller, medium-sized operators, what they're doing is that instead of just paying that bill all in one shot just for them, is that they're splitting the URLs. That is a trend.
Other things to take into consideration in Brazil, which perhaps operators need to know ahead of time, is payments, right? How payments work in Brazil. So they want to make the usage of Brazilian banks and local payment service providers involved in transactions. They are not allowing for the traditional credit card processing or cryptocurrency digital asset processing. It has to remain in the Brazilian system. The Brazilian system uses what is called PIX, PIX. It's basically an electronic transfer payment service that is hooked up with the Brazilian central bank. Again, in this case, we would suggest wholeheartedly to if you were to enter that market, to go with a Brazilian service provider, at least have some sort of association so you can navigate those waters, because again, it is completely different insofar as what normally operators, from a payment side are used to, right? So it's something that's very, very important when you're considering entering into the market. But again, I mean, the mature operators are used to this type of, implementation of whether it's to stimulate the local economy or different types of payments. In this case, I imagine Brazil wanted to do both and also track the movement of capital to be sure that taxation is being implemented in the right way and their coffers are being, that they're basically collecting money that they need to. And so there's a reason why the payment system has been put in place. Other issues.
So let's just continue with the payments itself. Is PIX generally well adopted directly with the Brazilian market?
Yes.
Yeah. So all the consumers have it. So the rate of penetration of the PIX system directly
Yes.
from a payment side. Okay. So that would emerge in any event as being the leading one, even if they weren't enforcing.
That's correct. But the problem is, I mean, so there is other things that regarding the market itself. So for instance, the operators have to have facial recognition at all, facial recognition ID for participant, in an operating site at all elements of the transaction. So that's become an issue because not all Brazilians have the newest iPhone or the newest Android. So operators are a bit like iffy on that part because again, it's something that's not been used in other jurisdictions. And it's become an issue. Again, the Brazilian, the Brazilian labor and employment laws are very employee friendly. If you are to establish a business in Brazil for the purpose, obviously, of operating a gaming industry business, you need to be aware of that. The court system is notoriously backlogged in Brazil. So whether it's whether you're dealing with employees or actual disgruntled players who are taking operators before the courts, you need to know that it's a highly regulated environment at a local level as well, right? So these are issues that have propped up early on, but the Brazilian regulator has yet to show their teeth. Obviously, it's only March, right? Well, the end of March, but it's still only 3 months. They will eventually show their teeth to to operators that are not adhering to their regulations. What you want to avoid is, you had mentioned,
So from your experience, there hasn't been any enforcement action taken against any multi-jurisdictional actors?
Not yet. No, they have not shown their teeth from what I've read, from what I've been told by our colleagues in Brazil. They have not shown their teeth yet. But again, that will come, right? What you don't want is operators trying to recoup their heavy investment into the market by cutting corners, right? Whether it's in their policies or whether it's in their onboarding or whatnot, that you don't want them cutting corners and then being, having a license revoked after such a heavy investment.
Yeah. Well, the investment is big, right? So whoever enters into the Brazilian market usually doesn't have Brazil as its only unique market.
No. So usually you have this in mind. You enter a market, and again, when you see. Now, whether that's a misunderstanding of the geopolitical reality of South America, and Edwin, perhaps you know it better than most, because like you said, you are from Guatemala. But people tend to, or operators, companies are no different than actual people. So people tend to think like, I'm going into Brazil, which means I can have, once I'm successful there, I'll go into all the other jurisdiction-specific, countries like Colombia, like Peru, like, Argentina is coming along as well, and I'll be successful everywhere. But it doesn't necessarily work that way. South America is no different than Europe, which is many countries with different cultures, different penetration, points. But again, like Ontario, if an operator proves its worthiness in a regulated environment, they have an easier time entering into the next regulated environment. So yes, Brazil is seen as a stepping stone for other countries in Latin America, of course, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, look, yes, 100%. From my perspective, you cannot have a single strategy and to enter into Latin America. And LATAM seems to be grouped together, but each and every single country from a developmental stage is very, very different. From a payment side, one of the difficult things directly in Latin America is payments. So, what they used to in the first world, which would be, gaming in Ontario, in the US, almost anywhere else, which would be payments directly via credit card, is something that in Latin America is very, very difficult.
It's a cash-rich society.
It's a cash-rich society. The credit card penetration rates are relatively low. And the reason why they're relatively low is because they don't really have a very good way of, the credit card companies don't have a very good way of determining exactly how much credit to extend to people, because I wouldn't say most, but a lot of people do underreport their incomes, and so they have no real way of grasping, right? So, but the credit card penetration rates are getting to a point in which it starts becoming somewhat interesting, and it'll start becoming interesting, entering and emerging into different markets. Even markets such as Guatemala, to give you an example. The Guatemala credit card penetration rate right now has increased quite dramatically over the past few years, but let's say even a 30% increase from a 3% credit card penetration rate, extremely low. Like before you get to the 60-70% in terms of people who have access to credit cards is going to take quite a few years. And so the successful operators directly within that jurisdiction have a post-op type of system whereby they're actually receiving their payments by collaborating with many other industry participants. So going with the local corner stores, or doing, for example, the type of distribution which is very, very personal. You have one guy at a street that's trying to collect, so it's different. But a lot of the success is driven by the movement of capital, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This business itself is all with regards to the movement of capital.
Yeah, and you mentioned Guatemala. It's an interesting emerging market. In that Central American.
So look,
you have Guatemala, you have El Salvador, you have Nicaragua. Costa Rica's shunned gaming, but out of those three, Guatemala is probably the most intriguing market.
You have a lot of operators that are in there right now. If you go and you watch a national game, or you watch one of the football leagues directly in Guatemala, you'll see that they're all there. They have Dorado Bet, they have Gana 777, So they've found a way to be able to penetrate the market, notwithstanding the fact that payments has become very, very difficult.
Yeah, the online gaming space in Guatemala has not been legislated yet. There's obviously a lot of land-based casinos. We've worked with a few of them regarding doing some work for them.
But this is just one jurisdiction,
Yeah,
right?
it's just one.
And it's a relatively small jurisdiction. You look at a market of about 17 million people, but you start entering into South America right after Panama. You're looking at Colombia, you're looking at, these are massive, massive markets.
Massive markets, absolutely.
But they managed to make a lot of money even from small markets such as Guatemala, right? And again, like there's three different verticals directly within gaming, right? You have the lottery vertical, you have the casino vertical, and you have your traditional sportsbook vertical itself. And some of these verticals are perhaps a lot more interesting in certain jurisdictions than others, right? Lottery is sort of like the be all end all. Like no matter where you go, lottery is very well understood, right? Everybody wants to pay $1 to win $1 million. And so that's the dream.
The lottery vertical is actually very successful in Guatemala. It's actually, the government actually has given, third parties the ability based on certain parameters, one of them being, social justice, if you will, to help nonprofit organizations to help, whether it's people that are ill or any type of social environment where you can help people. There's different organizations that have been given this power by the Guatemalan government. But again, iGaming remains there's no legislation yet. We've heard murmurs of it, but right now, like you said, it's operating in that type of environment. I feel that again, South America, Central America is definitely the place that is emerging a lot quicker.
So so we're talking about jurisdiction specific, right?
Jurisdiction specific.
Now, one of the things that's also become very, very interesting right now is the multi-jurisdictional licenses, right? So multi-jurisdictional licenses, Isle of Man, Malta, Kanawaki, you have Tobique that first come up, which is a little bit more recent. You have Anjouan as well. So these are multi-jurisdictional licenses which are being issued, to be able to operate across obviously multiple different jurisdictions around the world. One of the models that has been utilized, or one of the regulators, has been relatively successful here, has been Kanawaki.
Yeah.
Right. So Kanawaki is
First Nations
territory in Canada, which is approximately 15-20-minute drive away from our office. Very, very unique. They were perhaps some of the leaders, at one point, leaders within the industry in terms of actually growing the gaming, right? I think, very early on when I was practicing directly with Cookie, I think every single operator in the world had a Kanawaki.
Early on, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Everybody had a Kanawaki, and Kanawaki was the talk of the town. Recently, it's been, because there's so many different offerings, one of the questions that we often get asked is, what is the benefits of these multi-jurisdictional licenses, right? Because they all give you access. They're all perhaps a little bit similar in terms of what they can offer, but they're very, very different in terms of onboarding. They're very, very different with regards to their compliance requirements, and they're very different with regards to the access to certain markets. I mean, I think almost every single one of them tells you that you can't enter the American market, right? I don't know a single license which will tell you that it's okay to enter into that market. However, if you go into Malta, you go into the Isle of Man, you'll see that there's a lot more countries which are restricted. Yeah. So, what have you heard about the multi-jurisdictional licenses right now? Is this a hot topic at this point? Is it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and being in Canada, we have, we basically have our ears to fire, if you will, regarding First Nations. Right? So, Kanawaki, of course, being the first First Nations that that went into this multi-jurisdictional iGaming type of license in the early 2000s, right? As you mentioned, obviously the office was heavily involved from a guidance perspective during that period. More recently, another First Nations territory out of New Brunswick, which is for those of you who don't know Canada very well, New Brunswick is a very small province on the eastern seaboard of Canada. And in that territory called Tobique, has emerged quite quickly, and they've they started their legislation and finally came into effect in April of last year. And since then, they've issued multi-jurisdictional licenses with the intent, obviously, to grow quickly, and they have to admit, they have grown quite quickly. They've been very successful in their outreach because they've basically, utilized trusted third-party services regarding all the compliance issues, right? So, regarding onboarding, KYC, making sure that the AML, counterterrorism financing policies are all in place regarding the operators that are trying to onboard. So, a very robust set of regulations, policies have been put in place by Toby, and they've been quite successful. Again, they're asserting the same rights as Kanawaki, meaning First Nations rights in Canada. Again, First Nations are of the opinion themselves that they can assert, self-governance, within their territory, which means that Canadian provincial or federal laws do not abide with them. That's their opinion. They've been governing self-governing economic activity for centuries within their territories, and they continue to do so, right? So Tobique is asserting that right, very similar.
Well, that's a right under the Canadian Constitution.
Yeah, it's protected in the Canadian Constitution, Section 35(1).
Which is the same section that's being utilized in Kanawaki.
Absolutely. So there's no difference, right? Every First Nation can use that, right? Because it's actually not even, it's an individual right, as opposed to just a specific nation or a specific territory or a specific reserve. It's enshrined in the Canadian Constitution. So Tobique has been very successful, and yes, I must admit it's only been a year, roughly, and I've seen them everywhere. I've had clients ask me about them. Very similar to clients, a lot of clients asking us about Kanawaki. Tobique, although being much newer, has been quite intriguing, the interest that it's garnered.
Yeah, and look, Tobique isn't, so the law firm itself does represent a lot of clients which deal with Tobique, deal with multi-jurisdictions. I'd say that one of the advantages of an office such as ours is our proximity directly with the regulators.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. We've helped a lot of the regulators directly in the past, and so that recognition and that collaboration that we have with the regulators, becomes very, very valuable.
Absolutely.
with our client base.
I mean, it fosters a trust element between the client, the operator, and the regulator, and when you have that that relationship already established, right? And sometimes it might just be that little issue that can be ironed out in order for one to get their license or not. But yes, from a Canadian perspective, right now, obviously you have, we had mentioned the Ontario jurisdiction-specific license, but for multi-jurisdictional purposes, the First Nations continue to assert their rights. And, I don't see them not continuing as well.
Okay. So let's talk about the trends, in gaming. What do you see as the trends in 2025?
Look, it's not only in gaming. Trends in all businesses right now is technology. Okay, and the digitizing of any type of business has become the ultimate trend. So in the past, the online experience has been relatively new from a business perspective. It's been 25-year casino experience, if you will, right? Where in the past, casinos started to have come into play in the 40s. It was a lavish experience. You needed to fly somewhere. You needed to enter into a land-based casino, and it was made only for a certain type of individuals that were seen basically to afford that type of experience. Now people can do it from the confines, of their home, from a different country, right? And as technology transcends itself into the next decade, you have emerging trends that have already begun, right? So you have obviously cryptocurrency, right? The usage of cryptocurrency, digital assets within the context of a gaming operation, right, has become, and we see it, right? With our clients, we see it from the traditional fiat payments. every year going to a more digitized, form of payments.
Yeah, and look, the speed in which settlements get made, the cost of it is lower. There's no reason why they wouldn't embrace this.
Yeah, but for every advantage, there's obviously, and again, this is where we come into play. For every advantage that the blockchain technology offers, right, which is a secure type of transaction, there's other elements that have to come into play, right? Like, I mean, knowing your KYC elements, that who is behind this transaction, right? There's all kinds of certain issues regarding KYC, responsible gaming, the unhosted wallets, right? So unhosted wallets are basically wallets that are not serviced by third-party service providers that are recognized, right? So you don't know who you're sending your money to, who's playing, who's not. So there's a lot of compliance issues with the usage of cryptocurrency. But again, for every advantage, for every there's for every action there's a reaction, and that's where you need
But one of the trends that I've seen is that some of the successful casinos, which are dealing with virtual currencies, and we're virtual currencies only, they're trying to get into the fiat type payments.
It's actually backwards, which is of course, absolutely.
So one of the things that we've been confronted here is, how do you take a current existing crypto casino and get it licensed?
Yeah, because I mean, what you have, and a lot of these propped up during COVID, because people were obviously stuck at home. So stuck at home, idle mind is a devil's playground, like they say. So what happens is, you go into situations where you had online casinos entering the market without being licensed, right? Whether it's multi-jurisdictional or jurisdiction specific at all. And the reason for that is because, I'm just going to use cryptocurrencies. I don't need a bank. I don't need a payment service provider. I don't need credit cards. So you know what? I don't need a license. Might as well just get into it. But then the success that these online crypto casinos have, had over the years have said, well, now I want to enter into the regulated market. Now I want to have fiat.
Well, how do I report my income?
So that's
how do I buy my car?
How do I restructure? How do I? So it becomes a good problem to have, if you will. But obviously, we've been confronted with that, right? With clients where they're saying, listen, not only have I been successful doing what I've done, but now, from an operational perspective, I want to grow. I want to be known. I don't want to be, I don't want to be that, left.
Yeah, they're looking at protecting their gains.
And from a personal perspective, it's like you said, right? I mean, so the shareholders or the, of these companies want to basically declare their income. They want to have, their income invested like any other business owner, right? So there's a lot of, upheaval, if you will, in the crypto casino world. And again, there's a lot of regulation that goes into there, right? So I mentioned the unhosted wallets, the virtual tokens, which is being used in the social casino aspect, right? I mean, the fact that there is volatility, right, in the cryptocurrency world, right? So I mean, if I want to wager $25, and all of a sudden that cryptocurrency is worth $21, I mean, how do you balance that? You got to give some sort of assurances to the clients regarding that type of transaction. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity. Digital assets is one form of technology that's taking the gaming world by storm. It's probably the first one. But now you also have AI, right, which is becoming which AI can be a very useful tool, in my opinion, for responsible gaming, right? I mean, AI can identify tendencies and behavioral aspects in a wagering party that can basically help online or even land-based casinos, for that matter, identify, for instance, problem gaming, right? So addicted gamblers, and basically help them self-exclude or perhaps exclude themselves, right? To have the operator exclude these type of problem gaming players, right? Because I mean,
I think this is a topic that we've that comes across very often when we speak to regulators,
Yeah, absolutely.
and they ask us exactly.
Yeah, responsible gaming is absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very mindful of the time right now. I think we have
Yeah.
5 minutes just for a
Oh.
question for a Q&A session.
Yeah.
However, I would like to, on that parting note, with regards to any crypto casinos trying to get back into or trying to get some form of license,
And we can.
I can tell you also that our relationships directly with regulators helps, because we've done this directly in the past, because there's a certain way in which you need to be able to approach this with the regulators, because you have to be very upfront. You have to be there has to be full disclosure directly on your end. These are things that we're very comfortable with in terms of how we approach it with the regulators, so that if anybody does have a plan in terms of actually getting licensing coming from that side of the industry itself, we've been quite successful in doing so. So from a Q&A perspective, is just wondering whether or not there's any questions. John, it doesn't look like there's any questions directly on our end.
But again, I maybe either.
Oh, there might be one there. Yeah, from Alex Strozzi.
So I guess the question is with regards to taxation. Alex, I imagine that.
No, it's Christina.
I'm sorry, Christina. So I imagine that the question itself is with regards to multi-jurisdictional licenses. I think from a taxation, you need to be able to look at perhaps a little bit different, in the sense that taxation usually gets there's certain levels, different levels of tax, right? If you're looking at income tax directly for the company that's actually generating the revenue, if you're looking at the taxation which the jurisdiction is actually charging, or if you're looking at the personal taxation for the UBOs, the ultimate beneficiaries, or what the taxation is going to get paid towards some of your partners themselves, if it's a game aggregator, these are things which are very, very difficult. I think we need to understand perhaps a little bit more your business before we can provide a comment.
Absolutely.
So actually, Alex is asking about Wolonek. Any action there?
Well, I mean, it's a land, from what we know, it's a land-based operation, right? So it's not.
Yeah. So Wolonek doesn't have any online presence,
unless not that we're aware of. No, absolutely not.
So I'm not. At least we're not aware of it. No.
So, I mean, the call to action, obviously, and Christina's question was a perfect example, right? It's not a question that can be answered here in this type of forum, because in a multi-jurisdictional setting where you're dealing with international corporations, international jurisdictions. We had mentioned taxation in Brazil, on the jurisdiction specific, Ontario as well, jurisdiction specific. But from a multi-jurisdictional setting, there's a lot of things that come into play, right? I mean, again, you mentioned most of them, but structure is important, right? Now that could be initially, always best to structure best when you're starting out, but some startups don't have the necessary budget for that, or post success. We had mentioned that with the crypto casinos, you have to revamp, your structure, right? I mean, if you remember correctly, Ontario had given that 8-month window, right, to basically restructure yourself before you're able to enter the market. So that happens a lot. We're definitely here to help in every facet of the structuring process. Whether you're seeking a multi-jurisdictional license or a jurisdiction-specific license.
But not only that, but it's also whenever you're soliciting or looking for capital.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So when you're looking for capital, you need to be able to make sure that your investors know that the way that you structured yourself was purposeful, and it's ideal for them in terms of the investment itself. You don't want the investment directly to go into a company where there is large withholdings, be it on royalties, on payment of dividends, or whatnot. So these are things that we need to have a discussion, but also Structuring is very important in the event that you want to make an acquisition or that you want to sell the company, or if your idea, your intention is to actually go public, then it really changes and modifies the answer quite dramatically. We do a lot of M&A. We do a lot of M&A activity directly within the industry, within a lot of operators, but it doesn't only limit itself to operators. It's also with game aggregators, with affiliates, payment processors. We've done that, right? And the most important thing is clocking the revenue, where you're clocking the revenue, where you're recognizing the revenue, where the revenue is being dispersed there afterwards. So from a taxation, corporation, you want to sell your business, you want to position your company to sell your business within a couple of years. All of these things need to be thought out beforehand. It would be nice to say that at the time of formation, but usually at the time of formation, your intent is much different than when you're looking at a sale.
There's a lot of budgetary constraints at the beginning. The problem is some operations that continue even after they become successful, the same initial setup, which at that point does not really fit their operational status.
No, and just to give you an example, like some of the clients that were in on gaming very early on, back into the 2000s, we used to form a lot of companies.
Yeah.
And so, we've done a transaction, I wouldn't say recently, but it was within the past couple of years, in which we had to consider the fact that there was maybe within the structure, there might have been anywhere between 40 to 50 different companies that they had, and they had their own rationale to having those companies. But when the purchaser came in, the purchaser just froze because the level of complexity to be able to manage that was too high. So we had to do a whole entire corporate restructuring, bundle a lot of the assets under maybe only limited to 3 or 4 different companies, clock in the revenue, have the recognition of the revenue, and then be able to make the recommendations. So instead of it being a relatively simple acquisition, it turned out to be an acquisition which was much more complicated than what it needed to be. It did go through, but not without a lot of pain in terms of a restructuring perspective.
And as an operator, another thing you want to avoid is being, flat-footed when you get confronted. Either, sometimes it happens a lot in banking, right, where a bank will ask you, hey, we want to see some of your internal policies, right? So what's your policy regarding the usage of digital assets, for instance? What's your policy regarding, your AML, counterterrorism financing, right? So, if you have those policies in place, which we can help, obviously, in guiding or draft in particular, if you have those policies in place, you're not stumbling and saying, wait, hold on, we'll get back to you. You're ready to go. You look like a mature operator, and that you're basically adhering to the current regulatory practices that most businesses have.
Okay. So listen, there was a question directly there, and the question was how they can get into a conversation with us for consultation services. Relatively easy. You go into our website, it's lazaruslegal.com.
There's an info,
there's an info form that you can actually fill out, and you can get in contact with either myself or John. Those will be fielded to one or the other.
Yeah, it's redirected directly to us. So I think it went well. I would like to thank everyone who attended. I hope this information was useful. Like I said in the beginning, I think this will be the first of many. We're going to do this periodically to keep the public informed of the tendencies in the gaming space, and also to keep everyone who wants to listen abreast of the situation, regarding the actual tendencies, and also how we can help, right? I mean, which is very important as well. And again, that last question was quite clear. I mean, if you need to reach out, you go on our website, Lazarus Legal. You'll get there's that info form. Fill it out and get redirected to either Edwin and I, and we're here to help. So thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.